A lot of people assume they do understand their finances until they sit down with someone like you. Is that a truth or a lie?
I'm going to go with truth. That pension is worth like having $1 million in a portfolio or a 401k because it's going to come in every single month.
Well, assets are important because they can make money for you down the road. It's money technically that is yours.
That's a great
and
answer.
It can grow.
Yeah.
But cash flow also makes you feel more comfortable in the time being.
What's the importance of money? It's not physically holding a $100 bill and that makes you feel good. It's what that $100 bill does for you.
Having nice things means freedom and happiness.
Taking the trips are definitely important, but I think, the bigger houses and the boats and the motorcycles and all the fancy cars and convertible, all that stuff, at a certain point, it doesn't necessarily bring you happiness. Welcome back to another episode of Retire and Thrive, where we help you live your life with purpose, wealth, and confidence.
I'm Kamie and this is Dan, and today we are focusing on understanding your financial landscape. And we are so excited. This is episode 14 for us, and we are diving in now to lesson 4, which is I will thrive as I understand my financial picture. Looking forward to this. This will be fun. More learning for us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we're doing something fun today because why not? We're doing 3 truths and a lie. So 3 truths and a lie when we look at your financial landscape. You ready for this?
I am.
Okay.
But you said we're going to do something fun.
It's fun.
And people are like, well, why would you do something fun? And my response, of course, is we're fun people, right?
Yes, we're fun people. We really are. We're enjoying these podcasts, by the way. If you can like and subscribe to the channel, we appreciate that so much. We put out podcasts once a week and really try to inform folks about what you need to know when you head into retirement. But it's not just for folks in retirement, it's for folks of all ages.
Right.
So
how did you come up with the 3 truths and a lie?
I don't know. Isn't that what people do? I don't know. I feel like that's like a game at parties or something, isn't it?
Yeah. I've done it before, but
Yeah.
I think it's a great concept. I'm anxious to hear what you've got.
Yes.
No, am I the one guessing or is the
Well,
audience
you just
guessing?
have to explain if they're true or a lie.
Okay.
So we'll start with this first. The comment, I guess, would be a lot of people assume they do understand their finances until they sit down with someone like you. Is that a truth or a lie?
I'm going to go with truth.
Okay.
And
ding, ding, ding. We have a winner.
I got that one right.
Because
Good.
I'm sure you deal with this a lot.
We do deal with that a lot. And I think it's a lot of times when people come to us, oftentimes I don't want to say it's too late, but they think they've got a good handle on everything. And then they're in their mid-50s and they want to retire in 5 years. And what they realized, and we hear it very, very often, is after we build out a plan for them, they'll come back and say, I wish I would have known what I know now.
Sure.
10 years ago or 20 years ago. And what I often find is it could be anything from I would have put more into my retirement, or I maybe would have put it in a different tax type that we talked about before, or it could simply have been I would have changed my allocation, or I was too conservative. So there's a lot of things that people, when we get kind of running into their numbers. And what's really interesting is when you look at the numbers, just to give you kind of an example, and again, I always use this number of $1 million, but if we're sitting down with a couple that's in their mid-50s and they've got in their retirement plans $1 million and they're going to retire in 5 years, we run different scenarios for them. And they look at that, and then we project them retiring at age 60. So just simple math says from $1 million, maybe it grows to $1.2 million from 55 to 60. And from 60 to 65, it actually goes from $1.2 million to say $1.5 million or $1.6 million. It's that whole compound effect. It just keeps growing and growing and growing. And oftentimes I hear, I wish I would have started 5 years earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And that's hard to resonate when you're in your 20s, putting money into a retirement plan.
Right.
But back to the truth, it's like, yeah, oftentimes when people come to us, they think they've got this retirement thing. And oftentimes they do, but it allows them to reflect of maybe some changes that they should have made prior to then. Again, it's not about regrets. It's about let's be clear and let's be intentional with how your retirement is going to look, and let's build out that plan for you.
Sure.
So if there's any message here, and I know we talked about it, I think it was maybe in episode 11, that you can go get yourself a financial planner, financial advisor, even if you're in your 30s and 40s. You don't have to wait till you're in your 50s because some of those decisions and some of the things where I hear people that are about ready to retire saying, I wish I would have done this, or had I known this, I would have changed things differently. So
Yeah. So something that definitely can resonate with the younger folks. We don't want, folks to feel regret, but it happens. It's a reality that you look back, maybe I could have lived a little differently, and maybe I could have threw a little more money here or there. And so a good message for folks. And that brings me back to the Tupperware and you raising your kids in a certain way and kind of instilling that into them at a young age is always a good thing. And that's for folks who are maybe in their 30s watching or 20s and they're having children kind of starting young and working with their money. All right, let's talk cash flow. This is a truth or a lie. Dan will be the judge here. Cash flow is more important than assets. Assets are important, Dan. Cash flow is more important than assets.
Why don't I turn this back to you? Why are assets important, Kamie?
Well,
Let's shift the tables here.
These aren't questions for me. Well, assets are important because they can make money for you down the road. It's money technically that is yours.
That's a great
and
answer.
It can grow.
Yeah.
But cash flow also makes you feel more comfortable in the time being.
Right. Yeah.
So is it more important than assets?
By the way, you did great.
Thank you.
We won't do it on this episode, but I almost feel like we should switch. I should be the one asking you the questions.
No thanks. Pass on that. There's too much information over here.
You're just telling me how old I am. Is what you're really telling
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you're well educated and wise.
Yes, cash flow is more important than assets. And
will everyone say that? When you go out to the public, do people know this?
Absolutely not. I think most people, and you can call it a myth or whatever it might be, but I think most people feel like I need to build a number. I mean, I got a good friend of mine who worked for almost 40 years for one company, and he had a number. And he says, when I hit the number, I'm done. I'm like, what's the number? In his case, he's like, $2 million. Once I hit 2 million, I'm done. And I'm like, what do you get with $2 million? Is it like, does everything just like, do butterflies go and money just starts coming down like confetti? And he's like, no, I just figure that's kind of a good number to have. But there's no rhyme or reason behind that. And so, we did talk in the earlier episode about that 4% rule. And so having a consistent income stream is more important than having the asset. I mean, eventually you have to turn that asset into an income source. Right. But yeah, having a consistent income stream. And we see that a lot with people that have pensions. And again, I've mentioned this many times before, but pensions have kind of gone by the wayside. But there still are employers that offer pensions, which is literally nothing more than a consistent monthly income coming in and being deposited into your bank account every single month. And it's very replicatable. It's consistent. It isn't going to change like Social Security. Mm-hmm. And so, if we use a very basic example of saying if someone were to get $3,500 a month in a pension, i.e. cash flow, if that's $3,500 a month, that's $42,000 a year. And going back to those 4% withdrawal rates, I mean, you'd have to have basically $1 million in an investment account at a 4.2% rate to generate that $42,000. In other words, if somebody came to us and said they've got $3,500 a month coming in their pension, but they might not have a lot in their 403b, 401k, and I'm like, that pension is worth like having $1 million in a portfolio or a 401k because it's going to come in every single month. And it goes back to that 4% withdrawal rate. So if you had $1 million at 4.2%, that's $3,500 or $42,000 a year or $3,500 a month.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Yeah.
Yes. You make me like pensions as well.
They're hard to find. I'm just telling you that.
But they're out there.
It's hard. And I think, again, we've had an episode where we talked, is the pension really important when you're looking for a job? And the answer is yes. But obviously, career potential and everything else is just, there's a lot of other elements to it. So I don't remember the exact numbers, but I can tell you pensions have shrunk to the point where, 20 years ago, the number of pensions exist today are probably 1/5 of what they were 20 years ago. It's and again, part of it is just because people are living longer, there's more uncertainty, and employers don't like that uncertain liability that they're going to have to pay that out for somebody's.
So employers who started with a pension, do you think that once the company gets rid of the pension, that person still gets the pension, or are they just like, we're done with this?
That's.
I mean, they'll get some money.
Yeah,
but
there's ERISA law, Employee Retirement Income Securities Act. Okay. It was in the 1970s that does protect retirement plans.
Sure.
So what we've seen happen over the years as companies have phased out those pension plans, they don't eliminate them because again, they're protected by ERISA laws.
Okay.
But they phase them out, and oftentimes what happens is they make the criteria either more difficult or they grandfather in the people that are in the pension plan, but new hires don't get it.
Sure.
So, but you're right. There are still companies out there that have the pension, but it doesn't even have to be a pension. It could be Social Security. It's the same scenario. So yes, I believe, and I think when we run the financial plans, cash flow is more important than assets.
Yeah. Both important, but cash flow definitely important, especially for that freedom aspect and feeling better, more confident, and not worried.
And I also think that when you have consistent income coming in every single month, it basically is simulating what it was like to have a paycheck.
Right.
And that's how people think. It's like, every 2 weeks I would get, $40 or $3,500. And so they know that between the pensions and Social Security, maybe they're getting $5,000, so they're short $2,500, and they might say, hey, I'm going to take that from my portfolio, and then that gets back to that withdrawal rate. But yeah, having a consistent income, i.e. cash flow, is very important in retirement.
All right, next, truth or lie. Having nice things means freedom and happiness.
Yeah, I think we're going to get into a little bit of psychology here and keeping up with the Joneses, but I obviously would say that's a lie. I mean, I think we've all experienced that. And whatever nice things mean to people, whether it's physical, tangible nice things, be it a car or a house or whatever it might be, we know that that's very short term.
Yeah.
And that newness wears off, and it could be, splurging and going up to the Mall of America and dropping $1,000. I have a friend of mine last year who went to the Vikings game, and he went with a bunch of buddies. And they were at the 40-yard line. He said 7 rows up, and they had a driver drive them up there so they could enjoy beverages all day, had a great time. And he came back and he said, it was one of the best days ever. And I said, what did that run you? It's great seats and everything. He says, a little over $1,000. And my jaw dropped, and I'm like, you spent $1,000 to watch a Vikings game? And he's like, I'd do it all over again next Sunday. So again, oftentimes those things wear off, and it's the newness. And again, we're talking about tangible things, but in his case, it was an experience of joy that he had. But what I'm saying is, oftentimes keeping up with the Joneses is detrimental, if I can use that word, because we do want to have nice things. But at the end of the day, and I've said this a couple episodes ago, we talked about deferred gratification, not having all of those nice things so you can defer that and have nice things later on.
Right. And it takes me back to that Disney trip, because that family, it was last episode, I believe, but he took his grandkids and family to Disney, and he didn't defer that he deferred it until it was Disney time. Right. And then it was time to, have that gratification by taking the family to Disney. And we've touched on it so many times, but you have your home, and then your mortgage payment is more. So you don't have that cash flow outside of paying your mortgage, or you get a bigger home, you have more issues. You have carpet that you need to replace. You have the roof, there's hail damage, and you have to pay for the roof or whatever. I have
a client of mine that I was just thinking about this more and more and more and more. And this client of mine was an extremely successful banker. And I'd worked with him for years and years. So he's probably been a client of ours for 20 years. It just made me think of it when you mentioned that. He's got a beautiful place on a lake. He's been a Harley rider forever. He's got a beautiful boat. They go to the Virgin Islands for 3 weeks every winter, big scuba divers. And I just remember, this was maybe 3-4 years ago. He's now in his early 70s. And he said, I talked to my wife and I said, look at all the stuff we have.
Yeah.
And he said, it's gotten to the point where all of that stuff is actually weighing on me. He's like, because I got to take the boat in and I have to get it winterized. And then, the motorcycle, I got to get that winterized. And then in the springtime, I feel like if I'm not using it, then it's kind of a waste. And he said, our garage is full of all this stuff. And he made reference to something that was kind of funny. And I think it really hit home with me. He said, every year that we go down to the Caribbean, he said, we go scuba diving. We always go to this same restaurant like twice in the time that we're there. And he said, the sun's just setting behind the ocean. And he says, we quickly run up and we find someone and they get a picture of us. And they're like, oh, what a beautiful sunset. And he said, last year when I was at home, he said, I bet we've got 25 different pictures of the same exact sunset. And he said, why do we keep taking the same picture over and over again? So yeah, I think at a certain point you get a realization like those things really don't matter. I mean, the pictures do, but taking the trips are definitely important. But I think, the bigger houses and the boats and the motorcycles and all the fancy cars and convertible, all that stuff, at a certain point, it doesn't necessarily bring you happiness.
Yeah. Yeah. Can bring you happiness for a little bit, but the stress that comes along with it.
Yeah, exactly.
It can be prevalent. All right. So I guess we technically already gave up our lie. So we probably know what this last and final statement is.
I'm going to guess the truth.
Yes, that is a great guess. So the statement was, if you don't know what your assets, or if your assets are actually serving you, you should take inventory. So if you don't know if your assets are actually serving you, you should take inventory. Something Dan likes, inventory.
I feel like we've talked about inventory every episode,
Yes,
Kamie.
it must be important.
Yeah. And again, when you say they're serving you, I look at it and say, what's the importance of money? It's not physically holding a $100 bill and that makes you feel good. It's what that $100 bill does for you. And whether it's an experience or whether it's a restaurant or a tangible asset or whatever it might be. So again, take inventory of all the things that you have. And again, it actually, and I didn't know that was going to be your last truth, it kind of goes back to my comment about the banker. It's just like, are all of these assets serving us? Do they bring us joy? Do they make us happy? And I feel like oftentimes we get caught up in it and they're really not. They're just things. They're just stuff. And not to get too far down the path here, but oftentimes, we have clients of ours that have collected things, and it could be they've collected cars or they've collected, certain memorabilia, whatever it might be. And once they're gone, they realize my kids probably don't care.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if it's important for them, that's fine. So my whole point is I do think you should take an inventory of if your assets really are serving you. And if it's important to you and it brings you joy, I think that's kind of the key word that I would use in this, Kamie, is if it brings you joy, if it brings you happiness and you like it, that's okay. And, for me, for example, I ran into someone the other day and they're just avid antique collectors. And I personally can't think of anything more boring in my life than collecting antiques.
People love antiques.
But some people love it.
They drive all over the country for it.
And I see, like in our little hometown, I see they have this, I can't remember the actual name of it, but it's a bunch of old tractors that show up and they have this little tractor show. And again, not for me. I don't really care about old tractors. Granted, I wasn't raised on the farm. But if it serves you and gives you happiness or gives you joy, then I think it's a good thing. But again, if you're taking inventory of that and you're saying, this is a great thing, or this is something I haven't used in 10 years, get rid of it.
Yeah. Some good advice. Do you collect anything? And you can't say money.
I don't actually. And
you don't collect anything.
Part of it is I've seen over the years, and it's not that I haven't thought of this, because I've actually intentionally thought of, is there anything I would really like to collect, be it coins or stamps,
sure,
or even dollars. And it goes back to what I've witnessed. And, for me, fortunately, I've been able to witness a lot of things over my 30 plus years because I've seen people that have collected stuff and I've seen what's happened, after they've left this earth. And I think of one in particular. It was a family that he had made fishing lures, and he had had tons and tons and tons of antique fishing lures. And it was his life's collection. I mean, since he was a teenager. And for him, that was a wonderful thing. But, then when he was gone, kids didn't care. I mean, that wasn't for them.
Right. And you can probably have one or two to salvage and keep in honor of him, but probably not 500.
Right. Yeah. And so I think it's, I don't want to get into the discussion about, collecting things and what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. But when you're taking inventory of what serves you and what doesn't serve you, obviously your portfolio is going to serve you. Your investments are going to serve you. But are there other things that don't serve you? And if they do, keep them. If they don't, simplify your life.
You seem well-versed on collecting. That's funny. I didn't know. I suppose dealing with a lot of retirees, you deal with a lot of folks that collect.
I'm going to say one last thing. This is very personal. There was a book out there and it was kind of fun. And if you haven't read it and you're interested in simplifying your life, I'm not a minimalist, just for the record, but there's a book out there called Spark Joy. And I don't know if you've heard of that book.
Yeah.
But I actually read the book, took it to heart, and I went through my closet. And it was interesting exercise. I literally took out every piece of clothing. I put it on my bed, and I'm not exaggerating. This was 5 years ago. And I held up every piece and I'm like, I love it or I don't. And I set it aside. And when I put things back in my closet, I probably cleaned out a third.
Yeah.
And there was an ancillary benefit that I wouldn't have guessed would have happened. One is I had a nice clean closet. This was a whole day process. This was 6-7 hours it took me.
I'm sure.
Goodwill made out like a heyday. But what it did for me, and it still works today, because this was maybe 5 years ago, is I now don't buy anything unless I'm replacing something.
Sure. That's
So, like,
good.
and you can relate to this,
Yeah.
being the avid golfer. I probably had, it's embarrassing to admit, I probably had 50 to maybe 60 golf shirts.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was noticing is I had about 5 to 7 of them in the front.
There you
Then
are.
I had 40 that
Yeah.
never even wore.
Right. Right. Yeah, you seem like the decluttering kind of fella.
Yeah.
I can
It took
see
me
that
a
in
while.
you.
Yeah.
Weren't you going to ask me what I collect? I collect bobbleheads, Dan.
Do you really?
Yes.
Okay.
You should see my basement.
I want to hear that. I did not know that.
Well, I just collect twins bobbleheads. I have way too
Oh,
many.
just twins.
Pretty much. I mean, I have a few extras, but it's just from like going to games and I have like a shelf downstairs and I have a woman cave and it's all Minnesota Twins. Anyway.
I've actually never heard of it called a woman cave, but I
I
like
don't
it. So whenever somebody collects something, I always have to ask a question. I know we're up against time here, but I have to ask. Is there a favorite bobblehead?
So I have a whole twins collection. I have a favorite bobblehead. The Twins actually just traded him. Their closer. It's a cool bobblehead and he has like this big walkout and it's very cool. It's new. But I do have pictures because when the Twins won their first playoff series in 20 years, I was in with the champagne. And so I have pictures of me and the players. I'm interviewing them. And yeah, so those are above my
Wow.
fireplace.
That is
So
awesome.
I also caught a home run ball, and it was the third home run of the game. And there's this for this player, Eddie Rosario, and I caught it. It was a walk-off home run.
Oh my
So I have that
word.
too, and it was on. I'll show you the clip. It's on ESPN too.
That is awesome.
Anyway, so I have a couple. Yeah, those are important to me.
And then lastly, and then we'll conclude here. Bobbleheads. Do you have any like previous players that are like
In the Hall of Fame and stuff.
in the Hall of Fame?
Yeah, like Tony Oliva, who is on the back of my phone here, but he made it into the Hall of Fame last year, and I have a ball that's signed by him, and obviously a few pictures with him, but a bobblehead of him, and yeah. So I have previous players too. I think I have Harmon Killebrew.
Oh, you do?
I think
Oh,
so.
wow.
Bobblehead, yes. They weren't nearly as good back in the day, though. They're a little clunky, but
Well, that's
anyway.
awesome. And you know what? Here's the thing. It goes
It
back to what
brings
we're
me
saying.
joy.
It does bring you joy, and it's
But those
fitting.
were free.
Well, the point is that not only does it bring you joy, but it has meaning to you because you are an avid fan.
Yes.
Oh.
Just like the fishing lures. I mean, those brought joy to him.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
he probably had too many of them, I suppose.
Probably.
Yeah. All right. Thanks for joining us today. Again, you can like and subscribe to our podcast, and we hope that we helped you maybe a little bit understand your financial landscape, or at least teach you how important it really is to know that so you can thrive in your retirement. We will be back next week with a new podcast. Have a great day, everyone.